I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Senator Tom Carper touted the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The Inflation Reduction Act is a slimmed down version of the Build Back Better bill. The legislation is a large investment in making healthcare and prescription drugs more affordable, fighting climate change, and taxing wealthy corporations. President Biden and Democratic lawmakers have touted the legislation as a solution to combat 40-year high inflation. Republican lawmakers have argued that the act won't actually help bring down prices. On the Senate floor Tuesday, the Delaware senator said that the legislation is, quote, paid for, it actually works against inflation, it helps people.
The Republican leader knows that I'm a huge fan of his. Every Thursday we gather, along with Senator Gillibrand over here, we gather in a Bible study, bipartisan Bible study. Most people think we would never pray together, read the scripture together, much less agree on anything, but we do that every week. And we agree on a lot of things. This is one area where I'm afraid we don't entirely see eye to eye, as he knows. As the leader prepares to leave the floor, I just want to remind us all of this. 2 weeks ago, the United Kingdom broke its record for the highest recorded temperature multiple times, reaching a high of 105 degrees Fahrenheit. How high is that? They don't have air conditioning in most places of England. They don't even have air conditioning, 105 degrees. Airport runways that week were melting in the United Kingdom. Railways in the United Kingdom are buckling from the heat, with riders warned to stay home. Over 1,100 people that week died in Spain and Portugal from heat-related causes. Wildfires in France forced about 30,000 people to evacuate. Organizers plan to pour, listen to this, tens of thousands of gallons of water on the course of the Tour de France, big bicycle race, in order to keep the road from melting. And more than 40 million people in the United States are under extreme heat warnings across, in our country, the Great Plains and California. Something like 60 million Americans will likely see temperatures at or above 100 degrees. Last week, actually, they did, as I understand it. Nearly 60% of California has been dealing with excessive drought, while 20% of Texas experiences exceptional drought, the most extreme level on the drought scale. Firefighters continue to battle huge wildfires across the United States, 12 states no less. Wildfires as big as my state of Delaware. The reason why we have put together legislation that actually addresses these really tale of horribles is because it's getting worse. And the scientists and people that we look to for advice and stuff like this say, it's not going to get better anytime soon. It's going to get worse. In Louisiana, you know what they lose from sea level rise? Every 100 minutes, they lose a piece of land the size of a football field. I'll say that again. In Louisiana, they lose a piece of land to the sea the size of a football field. Not every 100 days, not every 100 weeks, not every 100 minutes. Something's happening here. And I think what it is exactly clear, there's way too much carbon in the air. And the question is, what are we going to do about it? And is there something we can do about it that not only addresses the climate crisis so that these young pages that are sitting down here will not only have a planet to live in and live on, but someday they'll have kids and grandchildren, and there will be a planet for them as well. That's why we got to do something. And here's the good thing about the package that we'll be voting on later this week. It is paid for. Larry Summers, former Secretary of Treasury, former president of Harvard, renowned economist, basically says this package is not only balanced in terms of its budgetary effect, but in terms of its effect on inflation, it's actually counterinflationary. Counterinflationary. And the idea that somehow the IRS would get some more money to do their jobs. Let me just say this. I've been on the Finance Committee for a number of years here in the Senate, and every couple of years we have the commissioner of the IRS come before us. I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican administration. They beg us to provide some resources for the IRS so they can do their jobs. You know, the people that actually get audited the most are actually poor people. The folks that get audited the least are wealthy people. And maybe big corporations. The IRS needs resources. They need human beings. They need folks with the right skills. They need the kind of technology that will enable them to do their jobs. And if we do that, they can collect hundreds of billions of dollars, not by raising taxes, but by making sure that people are paying their fair share of taxes. That's what we're really trying to do with this legislation. It's paid for. It actually works against inflation. It helps people, particularly people who happen to be older and actually need access to pharmaceuticals. The legislation that we have actually says if you happen to be a senior citizen and you're on a Medicare Part D for the drug program, you cannot have, there's no way you're going to pay over $2,000 in a year. No way. Today, you can pay a lot more than that. We put a cap on that. But by the same token, as a senator from a state where we actually have a big interest in biopharmaceuticals and our whole area, including Philadelphia, New Jersey, and so forth, we don't want to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. We don't want to make sure they're still successful. We don't want to stifle innovation in the biopharmaceutical world. And this legislation does not do that. It does not do that. But it does say that with the drugs for which there's no competition, there has to be some cap on the ability to raise the price of those drugs. I think it's common sense. I think it's common sense. Some of us have heard the term of unforced error. I've been people, my detractors have sometimes said I'm guilty of making an unforced error. If truth were known, we all make unforced errors. But our Republican friends have made an unforced error here. And what they've done is they chose, because of their anger, their unhappiness over the agreement of Senators Manchin and Senator Schumer to move forward and address climate change in a way that's paid for, in a way that actually adds to economic development, job creation. They were unhappy. And unfortunately, they apparently took their anger out on the ability of us to move to legislation that actually helps veterans deal with injuries they've suffered in their lives from being exposed to toxic substances burned in these burn pits around the world. I know a little bit about the military. I'm the last Vietnam veteran serving in the United States Senate. Last Vietnam veteran. And we had a bite out of this apple in Southeast Asia in the Vietnam War. It's called Agent Orange. It's called Agent Orange. And we had thousands of Vietnamese, tens of thousands of, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese were exposed to Agent Orange and defoiling. But a lot of folks in American service men and some women as well were exposed. And they developed all kinds of maladies. And later on, the question was, are we going to do anything about it? Are we going to do anything to make sure that they're eligible for care from the VA and don't have to pay for all of it out of their pocket? And we've done that. We've done it in, I think, a very appropriate way. Did it decades ago. I was privileged to be a supporter of that, as were many of our colleagues, Democrat and Republican. We have a different kind of situation, but it's a similar situation in that we've got a bunch of veterans who served in places like Afghanistan and other places where they breathed air that was toxic. Not their fault. And later on, they became sick. And the question is, what do we do about it? What do we do about it? And the Veteran Service Organization, they've been very angry at their Republican colleagues in the recent weeks. I'm glad our Republican friends have come back and said, you know, we realize we voted to derail the Pact Act to help veterans from these burn pit injuries. We realize we shouldn't have done that. We all make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. I'm the only Democrat I know in this body who ever quotes Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon used to say this. Nixon used to say, the only people who don't make mistakes are people who don't do anything. Think about that. That's pretty good, huh? The only people who don't make mistakes are people who don't do anything. I think they made an unforced error. They voted in a way that I think was not consistent with their interests, and is not consistent with the interests of veterans, of which I am one. Well, they have an opportunity here. I'll say this is in a spiritual tone here, that they have an opportunity to atone for their sins. And my hope is that they're going to do that. But I hope at the same time as we do that, we'll keep in mind that this list of horribles that I just went down, going on the face of the earth just a week or two ago, we got to do something about it. It's real. We got to do something about it. Time is not on our side. Time is not on the side of these young people here, like 16, 17 years old. Let me see if I have one last point here. Let me go back to what some people say. I'm privileged to chair a committee on environment and public works. We have jurisdiction over clean air, clean water, climate change, roads, highways, bridges, water, sanitation, a bunch of stuff, good stuff. And as a result of that, we have the opportunity to write legislation that hopefully addresses a real cause, a real problem. And one of the problems that we found on climate change is the biggest source of carbon dioxide, biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions comes from the cars, trucks, and vans that we drive, from the vehicles that we drive. That's the biggest source. There used to be, as Senator Gillibrand, there used to be a bank robber named Willie Sutton. And he used to, in the Great Depression, he robbed a lot of banks. And he finally got caught. He was dragged into court, and at his trial, the judge said, "Mr. Sutton, why do you rob banks?" He said, Your Honor, I rob banks because that's where the money is. And one of the reasons why we want to encourage people in this country to buy vehicles that don't spew out a lot of greenhouse gases is because that's where the biggest part of our emissions are. 30% of the greenhouse gases in this country come from cars, trucks, and vans. And as we want to encourage people to, as they're ready to buy a new vehicle, to consider an electric vehicle. And one of the things that I really liked about the bill that's we're going to be debating later this week is we actually encourage people to buy not just new expensive vehicles, but to buy used electric vehicles. And so the middle and lower income people may not be able to afford a new electric vehicle. They can buy one if they want to be good to the planet, kind to the planet, be thoughtful about it. They can buy a used one, and we provide a modest tax credit for them. And the tax credits, I might add, in that bill that we'll take up later this week, are a lot more modest than they were originally, and I think that's a good thing. So, again, we all make unforced errors. I know I have, and I believe, I say this lovingly, our Republican colleagues made a big one, and I think they regret it. They have the opportunity to do something about it, and to do the right thing. To do the right thing. Let's do that. Let's do the right thing by veterans, and let's move on. And then later this week, we'll take up another challenge, and that is how do we save this planet? And make sure that my kids, my grandchildren, our grandchildren, and have the opportunity to have a planet that's worth growing up on. Thank you so much. I yield the floor.
Madam President?
Madam Chair, I've been asked, I think, to make a committee request by our floor staff. Let me just do that now to get out of your way. Madam President, I have 4 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader.
Duly noted.
Thank you, ma'am. I yield.
Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to legislative session and resume consideration of the House message to accompany S. 3373, which the clerk will report.